This is our third installment on Chapter 19 as we continue our look at, this time, the new business culture and way of life in the late 1800s. It is said that our government took a laissez-faire or hands-off approach when dealing with the economy and business in the late 1800s. Kind of the prevailing belief was what was good for business was good for the nation. But in this system of laissez-faire policies, there are winners and losers. In fact, big businesses drove out their competitors and smaller businesses, and they flourished greatly. All the while, as we looked at previously, workers toiled away at kind of low-paying, mind-numbing, kind of thankless, unskilled jobs. But this idea of laissez-faire approach was kind of stemmed from the writings of Herbert Spencer, who was an English social philosopher, and he kind of took Darwin's theory of evolution and kind of made it into this social Darwinism that we call it today. And what that means is basically, that the strongest and best run businesses would survive and thrive. And the businesses that aren't ran so well, they're destined to fail. And let them fail. And people are rightly placed at the skill level for which they qualify. And those who can, show their skills and knowledge will move up the rungs of society to, take on those better paying jobs that are more rewarding. So, the rich and powerful, it was believed, were better adapted to succeed in society at the expense of the poorer parts of, the working class. And with those ideas of survival of the fittest, it kind of plays out in Horatio Alger's novels, where his typical character kind of rises from rags to riches and, works hard and fulfills the American dream through thrift and hard work and self-reliance. It's kind of the story of really the self-made man. And these novels then kind of gave hope to all that they could also get ahead in society, even if they weren't exactly where they wanted to be, at that present time. And with the growing businesses and industries of this time, it was possible to move up the ladder of success. But also with the growth of these cities and industries came powerful political machines or political bosses. It took a lot of money to build the cities and sewer systems and water lines and pave the streets. And with all these projects came kind of big government and corruption. Probably the most prime example is Boss Tweed and his cronies of Tammany Hall in New York, whereas the kind of Democratic Party organization had dominated politics really from the 1850s through the 1930s. And for example, the New York County Courthouse, where it was only supposed to have cost $250,000 when it was all said and done, cost over $13 million. They're buying all sorts of expensive chandeliers and granite counters and things like that. But eventually, with the aid of Thomas Nast's political cartoons, Tweed does fall from power in 1872 when he was brought up on corruption charges and he lands in jail. But during this era, you do see a lot of corruption running rampant, but they're able to provide so much for their constituents and kind of buy the votes of the people moving into the cities and from the new immigrants that were coming into the country. And, if they could get their votes, they promised to give things back in return. And that's exactly what they did. But at the same time, as there were jobs to be had and people were making money, you also see kind of this rise in entertainment and popular events going on. Whether it's something as simple as cards and dominoes to things like traveling circuses of the late 1800s. But what we witness is a increase in spectator sports like baseball and college football, rising in popularity, and you even see professional organizations being developed. And so, with this new culture, there really is new forms of entertainment, and that's something that you'll kind of read about in your text a little more as well. Now, not only was there changes in entertainment, but there was also changes to education. Education at this time was seen as a way to prepare people to live in an industrial society, teach them to read, write, kind of to be prompt and timely with bells and stuff to kind of start and stop, and just trying to help them to be successful in this industrial era. And yet the fact remains that few students reach the sixth grade, as many children, if you remember in previous lessons, were actually working to help make money for their families. And furthermore, we see that Southern education still lagged behind that of the North, and many times were segregated due to the 1896 ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson, which established the separate but equal clause, legalizing segregation as long as facilities were equal, which we know many times they weren't. And this isn't going to be overturned, however, until the 1950s and Brown versus Board of Education. And continuing along the idea of education, we take a look at higher education. From 1880 to 1900, there was over 150 new colleges and universities established, and all these colleges and universities continue to flourish with the support of government and wealthy industrialists, donating money, whether it's to support an existing college or to start up a new one. There's also a greater emphasis on professionals and research, kind of dealing with things with science and engineering. So you kind of see the focus of higher ed changing. It's not just to train clergy and for just the elite anymore, but there's other jobs that are being opened up during this industrial era that need more highly trained and skilled professionals. And then furthermore, we see that women are achieving college education because prior to the Civil War, there was only 3 colleges that admitted women. And afterwards, we see women colleges opening up and other colleges going co-ed. However, advances in education for minorities lagged way behind. One man, Booker T. Washington, who was an ex-slave, helped establish the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in 1881. And in one of his speeches, in what became known as the Atlanta Compromise, Washington stressed patience and hard work. He said that blacks should focus on economic gains and work their way up, and not maybe demand equality and integration right away, that those things would come. So in essence, he believed rather than fighting for the civil rights head on, that blacks should work at self-improvement. It was kind of like planting a tree, he said. A young sapling might be weak and waver in the wind a little bit, but given time, it'll grow and become stronger and stronger. And that's kind of how he saw African Americans. Kind of improve their way in life. That way they can provide for their children. Their children can maybe get a better education. With that better education, they can get better jobs. And with better jobs, they'll have more leisure time, and they'll be seen as the same kind of standing as whites and be accepted and have those same rights. But it would take time. Time that W.E.B. Du Bois did not want to wait for. For on the flip side of the coin, Du Bois, unlike Washington, wanted kind of immediate equality. He wanted African Americans to fight for civil rights using the court system and politics to try to force changes to society. Du Bois, in fact, studied at Harvard University and became the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard. And he later on went on to co-found the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is used yet, still today to try to force equality and bring about issues and opportunity for minorities. And so Washington and Du kind of, even though they're fighting for the same thing, had kind of different ways of trying to achieve their goals. But this era didn't just witness the African Americans pushing for more rights and reforms. We see other groups as well. And just to name several that you'll be reading about as well, one is Jane Addams, who founded the Hull House in Chicago. She established the Settlement House in 1889, which was to try to help immigrants adjust and find their way in the new country that they were now residing in. Another one is Florence Kelley, who worked extensively to try to end child labor. And then the social gospel movement, which was a religious philosophy that didn't just promise an afterlife, but focused on improving things here, like in the cities. So churches aimed at improving life and saving souls. And other moral and political issues were tackled as well. Some of these include the Mugwumps, which was a group that tried to end political corruption, like we saw with Boss Tweed. The Women's Christian Temperance Union worked with prohibition, attempting to prohibit alcohol. And it was established in 1874 in an attempt to end the evils associated with alcohol, like abuse, accidents, work injuries, neglect, child and spousal abuse, and different issues that drinking brought on. There's also the Comstock laws, which was an attempt to regulate morals. For example, they tried to outlaw and did outlaw the dissemination of birth control and birth control information. And lastly, we also see the National American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Susan B. Anthony, which fought for women's rights to vote. And so what we've seen develop here in the late 1800s is a period of immigration, urbanization, and industrialization. And we've taken a look at the effects that these have had and how it changed life in America. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in our next lesson.